Hello, 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 hello. Hi, everybody. It's Friday and it's the last Friday in the month. And for a lot of people, that's payday. Woohoo! It's also PMO Hot House. And thanks for joining us. And let's get going. Whoosh! Flames, flames. So, hello, hi, everyone. Hi, John. Hi, Eileen. How are you?
Hi.
Hey, hey, how you
Oh,
doing?
Yeah.
busy. Looking forward to the conference season is about to start.
I've got my herding cats mug of tea and I'm ready to go.
Excellent. So thanks very much for joining us. It's another monthly PMO show. I hope you enjoy these sessions that we put together. They're also live streaming right now on LinkedIn, on X, Facebook as well. And so we're glad that you can join us in the audience, as it were. And what we try to do with these is just bring you some different aspects of PMO each month. So if you're busy, and don't get a chance to come to some of the House of PMO events that we put together, this hopefully will just be a quick fire thing on a one Friday every month, slightly different than some of the other things that we do. So you can just dip into it. You can also go back and see it on our YouTube channel as well. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. So let's get going. The first segment of the session. That little urchin voice then, it's not somebody that we've got here locked away in the House of PMO in the basement. Really sweet though, isn't it? So we always have a live PMO news section, and interestingly, it's always trying to find some of the news for this for this section, because you can probably imagine there's not massive amounts of it, amounts of PMO in the news each month, but what we do is bring you some different insights, some different perspectives, things that we think that you might be interested in, which can always help in your job or in your thinking and that kind of good stuff. So let's crack on. So many of you are familiar with this guy. I know a lot of you have picked up his books. Is a psychologist that's been around for a little while now. He's some of these books that he has had that I know some of you have picked up. John, Eileen, familiar with Adam Grant? You come across him?
I have. I've got the originals book and liked it, and I've got his next two on my to purchase list.
Oh yes, well you need to get on it because that library, it's forever growing. Adam Grant is been doing some really interesting sessions and doing some work with the World Economic Forum. They're doing some series at the moment, which is about workplace trends. So of course we're all working in workplaces, and I thought it'd be quite interesting for you to have a listen to this one. So this is basically Adam talking about character. So what I wanted to do was just to play the video for you. If you just bear with me a second, because it's my do you know, I had this down patch and now I can't see the screen. Okay, so here, let's go. Let's have a listen to what Adam's got to say about character in terms of people working today in the workplace. So here we go.
I think we make a fundamental mistake when we're judging our own potential and also other people's potential, which is we think it's possible to judge where someone is going to land by looking at where they start. So if you pick up a musical instrument or you try a sport and you're not initially good at it, you think you lack the talent to succeed. And so if we count ourselves and others out just because we seem to lack talent at the beginning, then we're going to miss out on great opportunities to get better and get better at getting better. And that's where character, I think, becomes so important. Economists have found that character skills can actually contribute more to success than cognitive skills. So if you look at the cognitive skills that you pick up in kindergarten, character skills are about 2.5 times more important in predicting how much money you earn in your 20s. I think it's a travesty that job interviews overlook the hidden potential in so many candidates. Because how you show up in an interview is not diagnostic in most cases of how you're going to do in the job. It's basically a question of how well do you handle performance anxiety. And a lot of job interviews are designed like interrogations, where you're going to be grilled, you're going to be put under extreme stress, and very few people are able to put their best foot forward in that situation. I think a lot of workplaces are catching up to the idea that character skills really matter. And I think one of the overlooked reasons why they matter is they decide whether we're going to be resisting change, whether we're going to be quick to adapt to it, or whether we can actually anticipate it to the point that we get to drive the changes that are happening in the world. And last time I checked, there are very few leaders who want to freeze when the world changes. Not getting better is a really depressing and disappointing experience for people. Nobody wants to stagnate, and definitely no one wants to get worse. And so I don't think anyone should be pressured to be constantly improving at everything. But I think part of being a good human being is recognizing that you always have hidden potential and having a goal for something that you want to improve at that will make you a better partner, a better friend, a better colleague, a better mentor. And I think that's our responsibility to other people. I also think it's our responsibility to ourselves.
So, really relevant, don't you think? A lot of the messages in that, and I thought it was just just a really interesting perspective. But certainly now with our workplace changing so much, that just different things like this in terms of how we work with others, how we're managing people, all of that kind of good stuff. So bravo to Adam, and if you want to have a look at that video and share it perhaps with some of your colleagues, you'll be able to find that on the World Economic Forum website. So moving on, so quick reminder that for everybody who is working in PMO, this date should be firmly in your diary. Again, this is to look back on the first International PMO Day that kicked off in 2023. We're back, it's the second Tuesday in May, so this year is the 14th of May. And if you are thinking about getting your team together and you're wanting maybe the House of PMO to get involved, Eileen's already been snaffled by an organisation that is planning on doing something special on International PMO Day. So they're already starting to think about that date. So again, just a reminder, but this is a really nice way to bring people together, have a bit of fun. And of course, you can see from that picture, but cakes and biscuits feature quite highly. So what's not to love there? So we've got some latest developments from Open AI as well. Again, we've been talking a lot about this at House of PMO. It's that generative AI stuff. It's a chat GPT thing. You may or may not have seen this, and this is going to be an interesting one. It's not yet available. It's not yet available for people with, the accounts at Open AI. They're still doing some security checking on this, and you can probably understand why. This is something that is a new AI model that allows you to create realistic and imagined scenes from text instructions. Absolutely crazy. If any of you have seen any of the latest dramas and things where they're talking about deep fakes, I think that's probably why we're doing quite a lot of security checks at the minute. Have a look at it though. I mean, you can see the prompt here on the side, a beautiful homemade video showing the people of Lagos, Nigeria, in the year 2056, shot with a mobile phone camera. It is all fake. And I always find, just look at the fingers. That's one of the things that AI just seems to really struggle with people's fingers. So if you're looking at any of this kind of stuff online, it's always a way that I can tell. But it's going to be just out of this world. I've got some brilliant examples on their website. But the interesting thing is would the PMO be using any of this kind of stuff? Maybe not today, but it is something to be said about thinking how we can incorporate this kind of technology, but also do we use kind of image? So how far is it to include in our communications type stuff, video as well. On that same theme, something that you may or may not have seen, which could certainly help you, is the generative AI framework, which has come out from government. This is available to download. It is a really interesting one, as if PMO is getting involved in your organization's approach to AI. This example came up from one of our last sessions that we were doing on generative AI and using ChatGPT. It got put in the chat, and somebody who was working in central government said, "Oh, have you seen it? It could be really useful for people." It gives them quite a lot of starters in terms of how do you get this being used in your organization, and specifically within project delivery. They do it on a principle-based model, but the document that you can see there on that URL, or just to put in generative AI government, you'll be able to see this quite a comprehensive document of about 90 pages that does give you some insights into how you can start to pull together a business case, and also kind of, like policies and regulations and stuff. So again, if you're not familiar, it was just released at the end of January, so quite current. Back onto some news. So NASA have got a new Moon to Mars program office. We always like to have a look at what other people are doing in terms of PMOs, and if you've ever wondered what the focus is for a program office in NASA, you can see there that they tend to do a lot more around planning and analysis type stuff. Yes, it is quite technical, but again, it's always really interesting. Can you imagine telling people that you're working in the Moon to Mars program office type PMO? It's fantastic, isn't it? So good luck to them. Hopefully the PMO will be doing a stellar job. Also in the news, Forbes, many of you will be familiar with it in terms of a kind of management-based website, bringing latest news in all sites or all areas of business. They've just released, even though it is only February 2024, they've already come out with their PMO software, project management software of 2024. Yes, some of these have obviously got some kind of advert type stuff in there, but they say that it does not affect their editorial when it comes to picking what these things are. Interestingly for me, as someone there that I've not heard of before, maybe you're the same, but again, it's the latest things in terms of what people are using that are working in the project management space. And finally, we always like to have a bit of a PMO job spotlight, and this time, if you remember last month, we looked at the data analytics and whether people that are looking for PMO people at the moment are actually starting to put that kind of stuff in a job specification. So this month, I thought, well, I wonder how many PMO roles out there have actually got service catalogue as being a thing in terms of their PMOs. We've talked a lot about service catalogue. We've even got the book, the PMO service catalogue, but how much of it actually gets put into something like a job advertisement? Well, out of the jobs that were listed, there were 71 jobs listed. However, most of those jobs, perhaps not surprisingly, were based around service management, service engineers, DevOps, IT architects, because service management is obviously a thing, ITIL, and service catalogue does form part of that kind of industry sector. But there was one PMO role that does mention the service catalogue. So, again, this is exactly like the data analytics one last month. There was only one that was that's actually listing that in the kind of job advertisements, which tells you something, about how PMOs might be doing a lot of work in progression around data analytics or around that kind of service-based approach. But in terms of advertisements and stuff and asking people for particular skill sets around these areas, not so much. So that's it from the news this month. Hopefully
Loads
some
of
of that
good stuff
resonates
in
with
there.
you. And over to you, Eileen.
Excellent. Well, I just want to go back and kind of there's bits I'm going to download, there's bits I'm going to read. Yes, right then. So here we go. So my session this week is on resource management, and it's done primarily because we had a request in on the HotPMO website as to kind of what we had in terms of resource management. So I thought I would just do a kind of a quick recap of some of the resources we've got and why we think, kind of Lindsay and I were just kind of discussing this. It's kind of still all very relevant to what we're doing now in and around PMOs. So I think you know, for a long time, we had benefits management on the top of the list of things that organizations, and then obviously why kind of PMOs found the most difficult to do, really kind of getting some idea of kind of why were they investing the money in the projects and programs? How did they measure the benefits that kind of came through? And what we found over the last couple of years is that that's actually changed now, and resource management has gone to the top of the list. And I think there's a whole number of reasons behind that. Not just because there are more projects, and it's not related to the number of organizations that are outsourcing resource management and PMO services to other organizations. I think there is the whole kind of project economy, I think was the phrase that was kind of reinforced to me this week. But actually, in terms of the different ways we're delivering projects, much more kind of seeing lots more people in business as usual activities being involved in the delivery projects, and just the natural kind of volume of projects means that if we're not careful, that allocating people to projects is having a detrimental effect on business as usual, and therefore all of that kind of portfolio management element about kind of understand kind of what we're using on projects and what we're using on business as usual, is it the right mix, all kind of comes into play. And there is really a kind of a big role the PMO can play in this, which is why we have a number of resources. Just a couple of things that I'm kind of going to draw on today. So we did do a PMO managers lunch and do an inside PMO report back in 2017. I can't believe it was 7 years ago, but it's there. It's on the website. If you're a fully paid member, it's free to download. And there are other kind of pricings if you're a kind of a free member or not a member at all, but that's there to download. And we've been through it, still very relevant. And as I said, I'm going to pick up some of the points that you can read about more in that report. I think the other thing is, when we were doing the competency framework, we also kind of recognized that these were key competencies of people in the PMO. When supporting projects, programs, and as mentioned, the portfolio level, and there's work to be done in centre of excellence. And the kind of key three competencies that splits over, it isn't just resource management, it also includes capacity management and capability development. And one of the things we identified during the lunch is these three, although are separate competencies, there are separate services and kind of separate activities, they're all absolutely intertwined. And so we came up with this model, which we called the circle of resource management, and said, you know, kind of there are three kind of key areas that need to be looked at. There's a resource segment, a project segment, and a portfolio segment, so which I'm just kind of going to have a quick run through, just so we understand kind of the breadth of what we mean by resource management and increasing it in our organization. And I'm also going to touch on the service catalogue, the PMO service catalogue, because in there are a number of services and some hints and tips of implementing those services, which are also going to be helpful for us to be if we're addressing portfolio management in our organization. And I think part of the challenge is, as I've already said, these kind of three segments are fully intertwined. Very often in organizations, it's only one of these segments that is really causing a challenge, and either the organization hasn't got the bandwidth or the resources to actually address all of those three segments at once, so they have to focus on one. But I do think it's important that we look at what the interdependencies are with the other two segments, so we understand kind of some of the minimum things we need to put in place to help us address the one segment that's of challenge. Now, I already recognize that I'm talking at the kind of very fast, because I said to Lindsay, have I got 15 minutes or 2 hours? So I am going to kind of rattle through this. You can kind of go back. If you've got any kind of questions, do stick them in chat and we'll kind of pick them up as we go through. So first of all, let's have a look at the portfolio segment of this resource management challenge. And this is really where we're talking about capacity management. Well, we're starting to look at an organization level, or it could be a department level or a divisional level, in terms of, have we got the right resources and the right number of resources to actually deliver what the organization wants? And we keep having to remind ourselves, it isn't just just about projects and programs. In particularly and becoming more so, we have to recognize the resources across the organization and how they're going to be pulled on both delivery of projects and programs, but also on business as usual, and where those two and what the priority is around the projects against business as usual. So kind of a key role for us in that. And so the competence that belongs to this area is around capacity management. And in the PMO service catalogue, there are a number of services that we can put in place in order to help that. So, you know, you can see there from some of the kind of the circles within that we're talking about being able to forecast future resource needs. Now, I always find that really interesting because it means that right at the inception of a project, we're going to have to start thinking about, well, actually, what do we expect the resource needs to be? Now, you know, we're not going to be able to say, well, you know, kind of Lona's going to be needed on Monday afternoon and in the afternoon of the 13th of September 2027. Yes, we're going to be talking kind of big kind of chunks and some building blocks to build that in. So actually kind of developing and maintaining an estimating framework that is not just kind of individual task level, but a kind of we often talk about kind of t-shirt sizing and at project level is something that kind of sits within our role. And again, potentially looking at kind of resource tracking and capacity reports, so we can do that kind of reporting, insights and analysis back to senior management. And I think the other thing, and again, depending on kind of some of the tooling we've got, being able to provide that kind of what if, providing some options and some recommendations to help line managers, resource managers, senior managers to make the right decisions and the informed decisions on where they're going to be allocating their key resources. So quite a bit at kind of the capacity management level. And the danger is if we don't have this capacity management level visibility, we're going to constantly be balancing and kind of fighting the kind of the detail down of trying to allocate resources to individual projects, because we just know we haven't got enough, and we're just continually kind of fighting that kind of that battle. So second segment we've got there in the report is the project segment. Now this is where we allocating individuals to projects and programs. So we're not doing, from a PMO perspective, we're not necessarily doing the allocation down to kind of tasks and activities that sits within the project. So this is where we start getting down to kind of named resources and understanding where the best kind of people are in order to do the various roles. So a couple of the kind of, this is the resource management competence from the competence framework. And in the service catalogue, there's some really good descriptions of some services about actually, even though we may not make the decision on who goes on what project, but actually that process and facilitation of filling the roles and having some kind of generic role profiles for the different specialists on the types of projects. And again, some of the more detailed work we might do is actually kind of provide succession planning for some key roles, or actually facilitate the management of consultants and agencies. And one of the key things that I think is really helpful is we start recognizing resource dependencies across the projects and programs in the portfolio. So final section is down what we call the resource section. So this is akin to the competence of capability development. So it's all well and good saying, oh, I've got a project manager. Yes, they can kind of deliver a project. But if you've got a kind of a new junior project manager and you've got a huge complex project that's going to make or break the organization, perhaps that's not the best kind of project manager to put on that particular project. So part of our role, and essentially a lot of the time working with HR, so it's not something we necessarily do on our own, is actually kind of understand the detailed skill level that is required and start working together and developing some career paths and defining some strategies for acquiring and developing skills. Now, it may not be something we can do on our own, but definitely in terms of kind of working with HR. So, you know, kind of what we often find in organizations, we've got really good project managers, we haven't got any program managers, and therefore as a resourcing strategy we recruit in program managers when we're going to be delivering big programs, rather than putting one of our project managers on there who may not necessarily make the best big job. So 3 circles of resource management. One of those might be where your particular challenge is, but I think it's recognizing how those other 2 segments fit together. Just also, we touched on an area that we'll change depending on your organization is the constraints that culture and context add. So we've got there some kind of in the report some real kind of challenges, real life challenges about why kind of we can't just put in a process and it works perfectly. And it's really interesting. Some of the hints and tips that we've got in the service catalog will help you overcome some of the context. So again, kind of the type of organization you work in. But we also recognize that culture can have a big part in, kind of who's allowed to have what resources. The very fact that a lot of organizations still struggle with the fact that projects have to take people from different parts of the business, and a project manager potentially has to look after and guides and allocates work to somebody who's not necessarily in their department. So if we've got a logistics project, I might have somebody from the sales department and somebody from the stores department, and I might have somebody on the IT department, and that real kind of that ability to kind of manage across the piece culturally just still doesn't work in a number of environments. So just a quick touch on some of the kind of the key tactics, and again we can have some broader conversations outside of this session, but I just wanted to touch on a few that are in there. Is just when we're starting doing a portfolio level, we have to just recognize about when an organization, when is a project? It's often a question we forget because, good old Alan Sugar has named everything a project. My granddaughter comes home from school with a project for the weekend, and we don't sit down and say, so Eva May, let's do some kind of stakeholder analysis and make sure there's a business case for doing your little bit of homework. So not everything, even though we might use the word project, actually kind of falls within the remit of the resource management and portfolio management processes. And when we're trying to describe a project, let's not get hung up on 27 different characteristics of a project. Let's think of 2 or 3 key characteristics that helps us to kind of size and shape the project and make some kind of big decisions on the big building blocks before we go into the detail. So this is for you, John, to respond to the subject, the kind of the comment I saw a little bit earlier on. When we're looking at the projects, don't worry about the tasks. That can be left down to the kind of the project managers. And if we've got PMO analysts or coordinators, that's kind of where their focus is. When we're talking about kind of the project segment, we're actually kind of talking at a high level of the kind of the skills that are required for the individual projects. And there's some real kind of skills there in terms of having multi-skilled individuals to do that. And don't be afraid of using spreadsheets. Yes, a lot of the work that I've done in implementing resource management, we're in the big danger if we try to embed some of those resource management processes too early into a tailorable tool. Unless we've proven the processes work, people will throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, your PPM tool is rubbish. And it's not rubbish, it's just been set up to support the process, which hasn't been really kind of tried out and tested in the organization. And then finally, in the resource segment, where we're kind of looking at the skills and capabilities of people who are involved in project delivery, it becomes really difficult if everybody's got their own job title and there's 700 different titles for what is a project manager, what is a junior project manager across the organization. And there's lots of frameworks out there. Obviously, we've got the PMO competency framework, but there are a number of project management frameworks out there. Don't try to create your own. It is really hard work. We know how long it took us to do the PMO competency framework. So use something that's out there, but tailor it appropriately for your organization. That's my 15 minutes done.
Right, excellent, very, very good. You've got some comments there to have a look through, Eileen, at your leisure. So thank you very much. So we're actually totally bang on time, which is excellent. So hey, so we've got somebody new in our hot seat this week. John.
Absolutely. Hey, Roy, how you doing? So we've got Roy with us this week. So Roy's an independent consultant. I've emphasised that a couple of times as I introduced him. He's a P3 risk associate. He runs the for PMO learning. He runs their assurance for PMO professionals course. He's my sort of go-to person for anything around governance and assurance. So when we were looking at what was going on with the post office scandal, and we thought it might be an interesting one to explore here. Then Roy was obviously our sort of our go-to person to bring in and sit in our hot seat. Now, when we first spoke to Roy about this opportunity, he was very keen to stress that none of this was his fault. He wasn't involved. He was never there. All those kind of things. So he's joining us as a very independent person, just sort of reflecting on what we're seeing as they're going through, as more and more of the situation is unraveling and emerging. So of course, I think as most of us know, hundreds of sort of postmasters, postmistresses, sub-pub postmasters were wrongly prosecuted by the post office after essentially faulty software calculated money was missing from post office branches, which turned out not to be the case. System was put in by Fujitsu. There's the post office, so they're the big players: Fujitsu, post office, Bays in government, obviously now DBT. Lots of people involved there that should have had eyes on this and should have had appropriate governance around these projects. So I guess probably a good place to start, Roy, is from what you've seen, what sort of assurance would you expect to see in place versus what we know of what was in place?
But that's a very broad question to ask, really, because there isn't one place you get assurance from ever on any project. A project of this type, this magnitude, you'd expect assurance to come from all sorts of levels and all sorts of places. So just to add to what John was saying in terms of my involvement, it was my point really was that I have no more direct insight into the facts and figures and actually what did definitely go wrong than anybody else. So my perspective is very much from what I've read and the sort of questions and perspective I would have approached if I had been involved in that project at any stage. So I think it goes back to the very beginning. And one of the things I'm a bit of a broken record on about is when it comes to assurance is that you really can't talk about assurance just in isolation. You need to think about assurance in context of or in relationship with risk management and governance, because assurance on its own doesn't really do anything. It doesn't necessarily look at the right things. So you've really got to look at that sort of GRA, governance, risk and assurance framework trilogy. I refer to it as being at every stage through the project, and you can go right back to the very beginning. So 1996, I understand this contract was awarded. Immediately one would ask the question, well, there would have been a business case within the post office for this. There presumably would have been some form of business case within Bays, and Fujitsu would have had some form of onboarding process. I don't know what process they would have used for accepting the contract, but at that stage, right back in the of course 1996, that would have been, I think that was the placing of the contract. So the procurement would have happened sometime before that. So what questions were being asked? What was in those business cases around assumptions and risks? Had anybody put any effort into and thought into, well, how are we going to govern and assure this project through its lifetime? And I think it was recognized at the time that this was a very new, radical thing. I don't think anybody had done a system rollout like this ever in the world. So there was a real novelty in this. So well, my first question would be, well, what was believed, what was understood to have been the risks back in those at that time, and what were the arrangements that were being put in place around governance and assurance?
That's a really good question. I mean, is it possible when we think about high levels of novelty. Yes, but this project was sort of kind of bleeding edge in a number of ways. But a lot of our companies are often doing projects that are new, if not new on a global scale, new to that organization in degrees of novelty. And I've seen sort of different ways stakeholder groups interact with those. Do you think there's a chance that when business cases for these kind of projects where there's high complexity, high levels of novelty, that we almost end up not putting explicit risk and assurance controls in place at that stage, almost because people don't understand it, they shy away from actually putting it in? Is that something that you'd say happens?
I think behavioural attitudes permeate assurance throughout, and I'm sometimes asked the question, not so much recently, because I think people have got it more, but maybe a couple of years ago, people asked the question, well, we have so much assurance now in our projects, but they still keep going wrong. So why do they keep going wrong? And throughout my career, even before I started becoming a dedicated assurance professional, you could tell it was about behaviours, people finding routes around, people not following the standards and the processes because it was easier not to do so. And there's always this so often this culture of optimism and political expediency. And of course, you mustn't forget with something like this. This was, as I understand it, a politically very important project to happen. So it's politically important for the government, for BEIS, for the post office, and strategically, it would have been important for Fujitsu as well. So there would have been a collective group think there that this has got to be successful. I also think and suspect, but I don't have any proof of this, that there was probably an expectation that what they thought they had found in those first few years of rollout, all these supposed corruptions and misappropriation of funds and everything, that's what they expected to find. I think there was probably an assumption that, and probably it may have been a very sound assumption, that for years and years and years, sub-postmasters had been fiddling the books. It's a terrible accusation and unprovable. I suspect there was that belief or that suspicion, certainly within the post office and certainly within government. So the idea, because the implementation of the Horizon system was, as I understand it, the first time that post office could actually get real documentation of what's happening in sub-post offices. So when they started to see all this, they were probably starting to see what they expected to see. Who was there challenging the assumptions? Who was there saying, well, actually, is this correct? We've gone from 0 to 100 in terms of these prosecutions. Where was the audit committee in the post office, for example, looking at this and thinking, is this really what we expected? This is quite bad. Should we be challenging that? And we do know that the post office internal audit function was very small. I don't have, because this goes over a period of over 20 years. So the internal audit arrangements would have changed over that period of time. But I've seen one report done by a very expert internal auditor, an IT internal auditor, who again wasn't directly involved, but he'd done a lot of studying around this. And he said there were at times at the post office, there was like one person, 2 people in internal audit function. And the type of audit you would need to do around this sort of project, they wouldn't have the first idea or even anything like the capacity to be able to carry out. I've lost my train of thought there. So I think there's something around the challenging the assumptions and being independent enough and having enough time and resource and insight to be asked to ask those sort of challenging questions when there is a culture of this has to be successful, and actually what we're finding is what we expected to see anyway.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think we've got, and you're right, it was interesting because you started talking about the sort of governance, risk, assurance sort of triangle there. But then, as you're rightly mentioning, the assumptions, the bias, the sort of human elements of this also obviously play a massive part through everything. There must be PMO people on on this sort of session who've joined us today, who have probably looked at what's happening and will have thought, well, that couldn't happen in my organization, and then may have those nagging doubts about a couple of projects they may have. What would be your advice or your takeaways that I think that PMO people could take away in terms of what they could do to make sure they've got a degree of confidence that the right assurance is in place and governance in place around their projects?
Well, I mean, the PMOs have a very key role to play in terms of assurance. Exactly what their role will be of a person within a PMO in an organisation will very much depend on their position, the PMO, and where the PMO fits in to the organisation. What are the expectations of the PMO? Some PMOs, they will be recognised as having a project assurance responsibility. And they'll have people, they may have a department or a section within it actually responsible for project assurance. Smaller organizations won't have that in their PMOs. That's a difficult question to ask at that sort of level.
One of the key things, firstly, understand, as a PMO team, understand, does your organization have an assurance function? Reach out to them, engage with them. Do your processes align with those? It's quite possible that a project PMO may have spun up in the organization independently. So is there alignment there? I guess it's probably a good place to start, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, PMOs, in my view, PMOs they've got an assurance delivery role, sort of second line of defense type of that sort of area. Really key role to play in terms of setting policies, standards, frameworks, checking that people are following them, supporting people in following them. Ensuring reporting is done robustly, all that sort of stuff. But they've also got a role in terms of taking a step back from it all and advising the organisation generally on assurance. Does this organisation have sufficient assurance? The problem often is, though, is that the PMO's voice is quite quiet in this area. It's not a strong voice. And I would always encourage good relationship between a PMO and the internal audit function, because the one body in an organisation that does have the clout to be ask questions around assurance is the internal audit function. So foster a good relationship there. And if you're in a PMO and you are aware that there are assurance issues in the way that projects are being run, a conversation with their internal audit department may help them to focus their efforts on looking at the right things. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be sort of telling tales out of school or anything like that. It's just a good ongoing assurance relationship between different providers, the PMO at the second line and internal audit at the third line. Yeah. There's always also, all organizations should have a whistleblowing line, whistleblowing process and system. And of course, the worst comes to the worst, then that's the way you should do it. Whistleblowing, I understand, was pretty much absent from the whole of Horizon. So both within Fujitsu, Post Office and Bates, this is the work this IT auditor have done. There was no really existing whistleblowing, and it's a key component in good assurance.
That's good, Roy. Thank you so much. I know there's obviously so much, and we've barely had time to scratch the surface of it in our short lunchtime session today. But a few key things there. So PMO people, firstly, make some, if this has resonated, make some time this afternoon to find out who your internal audit team are, reach out and say hello to them and start a conversation there. Think about the process that exists in your projects for whistleblowing, even formal process within the organization, yes, but even ability for project teams to come and have a quiet chat with the PMO as a way through things as well. And also, again, the importance emphasized there of speaking to the business as well. We often think about how we speak to project managers, but how we also look to the business and be comfortable calling out the business that we work in if we don't believe they've got the structures in place around what we're delivering as well. Thank you, Roy, so much. I'm conscious of time. Lindsay, you probably want to wrap us up, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Roy. And you've got some links and things in there to some previous stuff that Roy's done for the House of PMO as well. So thank you very much. And just quickly before we leave, there's some more stuff coming up. Hopefully you can join us at some of these upcoming events. And of course, we'll be back. PMO HotHouse is always the last Friday, unless there's some kind of thing going on, like some holiday or whatever. So just check it out on the events page, and hopefully you can join us again soon. So thank you very much to Eileen, to John, to Roy, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Cheerio. Bye.